So, this is the first episode of the podcast. Today we have Joshua Vempala with us. Josh, thank you for coming.
Of course, it's a pleasure to be here.
So, before we get started on the, more pressing questions or more deep questions, I just wanted to, for you to give a brief introduction of yourself, any hobbies, interests, or origins, anything that you find interesting that you'd like to share with the viewers.
Of course, my name is Joshua Vempala. I'm the co-president of my school's speech and debate team. I think civil discourse is very important in society, especially a politically polarized one as ours is today. And I think it's not talked about often enough. And it's something that I really hope to bring back on Transparent Planet to see you revive. So, I'm a Roman Catholic. I'm a third generation immigrant from India, and I love talking about politics, religion, basketball, and cars. So,
So now you guys see why this is a perfect first guest on the podcast. So yeah, that's pretty much very interesting. And kind of going into the origin part. So according to the U.S. Census Bureau, Asian Americans have the highest median household income in the U.S. And within that ethnic classification, Indian Americans have the highest income with about an average of $138,000 per household. Synonymously, according to the World Bank, India accounts for 40% of the global poverty rate of 24.1%. So, based on this increase of people coming from India, which is, as we can see, one of the poorest countries, and then making a lot of money within the US, what do you think that we can learn from this as viewers?
well, first and foremost, I want to address a misconception, and that's that Indians and by extent Asians are seen as naturally smart due to a strict emphasis on
Mhm.
education. I think this is an overrepresented demographic. I think that brain drain is actually responsible for this misrepresentation. And for those of you who aren't familiar with brain drain, it's the mass emigration of talented individuals from a developing country to a more developed country. And India to America is a perfect case study of this. And the big cause of why this brain drain is occurring is inequality and structural corruption that makes it difficult for success to be achieved by lower class people within India. Now, to understand this, we have to go back to the history of India, and a big part of that is the caste system. Now, even though the caste system was abolished in 1950, its effects they still exist today. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the caste system, it's an ancient Hindu social hierarchy. At the very top, you have four accepted groups. You have the Brahmins, who are your priests, your scholars. Then you have your Kshatriyas, which are your rulers, your warriors. Then you have your Vaishyas, they're your merchants and traders. And at the bottom of that socially accepted caste, you have the Shudras, and those are your laborers. Now, within India, there's this kind of unspoken caste. It's kind of like almost excluded from society, treated as second class citizens. They're called the Dalits, or they're formerly called by the people untouchables. Now, those are the type of people, that's the type of system that India has kind of perpetuated for all this time, which causes people to want to leave the country. That's the main push factor, in my opinion. Especially if we look at the lingering effects of the caste system, how, like, even though the caste system was abolished on paper by law, you still have the upper class holding all this wealth. There's access to education, job opportunities. You have the lower class, your Dalits, your Shudras, having denied social mobility. And again, going back to the concept of Hinduism, how it ties into all of this, you have essentially this, how the system works is you have to live out, you fulfill your duties and reincarnate into the
Mm,
higher level of caste, which is really convenient for those already at the top of the caste. So,
right.
and then you have again more structural problems. You have this cycle of corruption and wealth inequality.
Mm-hmm.
You have this mass economic liberalization in India, the 1990s, which led to political corruption, crony capitalism, government officials being involved in the economy and kind of denying social opportunities. So ultimately, going back to your question of what we can learn from this, what we can learn from this is that wealth inequality is a serious problem in both India and the United States. We can learn that while on face level, like on surface level, people in India and Asia might seem really successful, and obviously culture plays a big part into it. But we can't underestimate, we can't deny the push factors that led those migrants to come to America to seek a better life, and that's something that we can apply to our citizens here as they try to seek a better life, as the lower class tries to advance. So,
That's interesting because I was also, I've had many Asian American friends, and I've also recognized the fact that there's a certain installation of discipline and hard work, especially not just
yeah.
within Asian Americans, but within immigrants in general. So, would you say that that is like the chief factor? Because obviously, they come here and they have to make a living, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
But it's what stood out to me is how well they succeed, how they
Right.
distinguish themselves, and how they reached what's considered statistically the highest median household income in the U.S. So, would you say that the installation discipline, hard work, is what brought people to this level in among Indian Americans, or what specifically would you
Of
attribute to
course.
this?
Well, I've talked about all the push factors. Now I'll talk about the pull factors. Now I'll tell you a little bit a personal story of mine. My grandmother came to this country with $8 in her pocket. She lived with a friend and a few family members, few extended family members, and essentially, she got a little low level job as a nurse at a hospital in South Florida, and now we have generations. We have like family members who work as Google employees, who work at real estate, who work as doctors, engineers, um, pharmacists. I think that yes, that discipline plays a massive part in success. The ambition of like someone like my grandmother to come to this country, not knowing the language, not knowing the people here, not knowing what the culture is going to be like, and succeeding. Discipline ultimately is the core pull factor, but there was also push factors like obviously structural inequalities within India that caused my grandmother to want to seek a better life.
Hmm.
So I think it's definitely there's two sides of the coin. There's
Hmm.
pull factors and push factors, but yeah, discipline it definitely it can make or break your success in America. So
Interesting. Yeah, that I found that a lot within immigrant families is people who come from disadvantaged positions usually are more they become more advantaged because they realize what is out there for the taking, and
yeah,
especially in the U.S. I feel like um, this applies to everyone really, not just a specific demographic. Anyone who has the resources, if you have the discipline to achieve a certain goal, you will achieve that goal. And so I just thought that was really interesting to distinguish and also I've seen a recent video from Vivek. I think I might have sent you this video, where a person asked him about his Hindu religion and how that might not be compatible with the U.S. government's views. So, to what extent do you think immigrants should preserve their culture versus assimilate? Because I can speak on this myself. That Hungarians, to some extent, come to this country like from World War I, World War II, and they assimilated almost to the point where they let out certain parts of their culture, or they
right.
they didn't really discuss their heritage. And so, what would you say is the perfect balance for immigrants today? To how much should they assimilate versus how much should they preserve their culture?
Well, first and foremost, you have to take into account why are you coming to this country, right? Why did my grandparents come to America? Why does anyone come to America? They want to achieve economic success. They want to achieve generational wealth for their uh, essentially foster a better life for their family, right?
Right.
So I think maintaining your culture is incredibly important. It's important to not completely assimilate to a society because your culture is what makes you unique. But at the same time, if your culture is essentially undermining the reasons why you came here for, if it's undermining freedom of expression, freedom of social mobility, all these freedoms that we value near and dear to America, then that's where the cutoff line is.
Mm.
If you're coming to this country for a reason and you're bringing in values that go against what this country is promoting,
Hmm.
then I think that should be that's where um, multiculturalism I think kind of ends with the country that you're kind of immigrating into.
I see. I
Yeah,
see. So while people should preserve their religion and preserve their culture, they should still respect the atmosphere that they're already in
of
terms of
course. Yeah,
culture and religion. And that's I think very interesting because we've seen kind of that come into contact and come into conflict, especially in Western Europe,
right.
in places like England, France, Germany, all these places. And so I think it's really interesting for people to keep in mind that yes, your culture is very important, but as people coming into the country, it's very important to understand and respect the country you're already in,
Of course. Yeah,
and still to foster a community based on where there's still unique cultures because this generation is built on unique cultures,
right.
unique people, and so yeah, I think that's very important for people to keep in mind. Shifting gears here to the topic of education. Now I
Right.
know I've known you for a while. You're involved in the debate club. You're in the honor society. You're a very, I would say, distinguished student in terms of intellect, in terms of hard work, everything. And so I would just like for you to share a personal experience that kind of shaped your views on education and how it's impacting students today.
Right. Well, first and foremost, I think there's been a huge controversy about like public schooling and private schooling,
Hmm.
especially in political lenses. I'll share my excerpts because again, I've only ever attended public schooling. I've been able to meet a wide variety of people from different communities, different cultures. I have friends in the AP honors, ACE, regular bubble, and I feel like having those experiences, having those people around you is incredibly invaluable, because when you narrow yourself down to a certain group of people, whether it be only AP kids, only regular kids, only honors kids, you kind of get tunnel vision, and it kind of prevents you from like questioning authority, thinking critically, and I think those are two very important aspects. So
Hmm.
that's one advantage that I've personally found in public education. Now, when it comes to resources, we enter kind of a different sphere. Now, I'll share a little excerpt of me at a debate tournament. So I think this was last December. It was at a debate tournament at Cypress Bay High School. I prepared for months against this topic for Lincoln Douglas debate. It's essentially a 1v1 debate, has requires a lot of evidence, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to make this case win. I ended up making it to the quarterfinals round, and I went against this my opponent from American Heritage. And I remember walking into that room, it was like the entire tone was different because I've been going against kids from public schools. I've been going against the kids from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, from Fort Lauderdale High School, and finally getting into the sphere of, okay, these people have more resources than I do. These people have coaches who are paid salaries almost triple the size of like my teachers, my
Hmm.
coaches, and they get college level cases. So I ended up losing that debate, but not on the topic. I ended up losing because my school hadn't informed the tournament that I didn't have the same resources they did. So it was an unfair debate according to my
Hmm.
opponent. So I think that's my first experience with this whole disparity between public education and private education. I think that's really shaped a lot of my views on. It's kind of solidified me further into respecting public education, and I don't want to say despising private education, but recognizing how those disparities do actually translate in places where it matter. So
Hmm. Yeah, I think I noticed that as well. Because I've also played tennis, for example, in the school team, and I've noticed like playing against private schools, they have access to different resources.
right.
Most of the time, they sometimes recruit players from different states, even, so they're on already on a higher level. So, do you think that public school teams in clubs and all sorts of things should uh, be competing with private school teams, or how can we balance that disparity between the two?
I mean, in a lot of cases, you know, I think they should still compete. I think that it shows a lot of hard work. It shows a lot of talent. It shows dedication. If you're going as a public school student and beating a private school student,
Mhm.
it's definitely possible. It just requires more effort, and it's something that isn't very easy to fix, especially since public private schools get a lot more funding than public
Mhm.
schools do. But again, that comes back to the topic of, is it really our funding or is it our allocation? Are resources going from public schools, are they going to bureaucracy, or are they going to direct student needs like extracurriculars, like special education, like training staff, technology integration? I think allocation is really important.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't necessarily say it's a budget issue. I would say it's more of an allocation issue, and I still think private and public schools should be competing against each other in that extracurricular sphere.
I see. I see. So I can definitely see that. I do think it is kind of like a badge of honor
Right,
if you, as a public school student, you still, put in the work and you still put in the effort, and it's really still possible, like you said, to do well and achieve great things against the private schools. So also I was thinking about this because for me this is it's kind of a rare thing, and it's kind of something that is a bit unusual to me. How we have the system or the situation with gun violence within American
right,
public schools, and this was, like I said, culturally, this is very rare in Europe and for me Hungary. Guns are banned in Hungary only for the police, but there has been like a significant uptick in gun violence from 1990s and on. And have noticed that there's been kind of like this atmosphere within the students where they've become almost desensitized to it. It's happened so
right.
much,
Yeah.
and it's such a big problem that they're almost it's become like an everyday. It's become a normal thing for them. And so, what would you think should be the school's role in kind of mitigating this? To what extent should they be involved in safety? And specifically, uh, like helping students cope with this situation, because it's a reality, a harsh reality that many of our students have to face nowadays, is going to school and that might be their last day in school or the last time they say bye to a family member. And for me, that was something that was very almost unworldly to have to realize. So, what would you say could schools do to kind of buffer this and to kind of help students cope with this challenge?
So what I've noticed is schools have tried to play a role in kind of helping cope with gun violence, kind of helping cope with school shootings, um, especially with the integration of metal detectors, the proposal of clear backpacks. What I find is that people give it a lot of pushback, and with good reason, because these are just gestures. They're nothing more than gestures. We're not
Mm-hmm.
actually like targeting the root cause of the problem, which is how easily it is to buy a gun in the United States. Gun restrictions are necessary. Gun bans, I can't really speak to that because there'll always be black markets. The same way we try to make drugs illegal, people still find a way to, you know, take them and sell them. So I think that gun restrictions are really what we should be focusing on. There's only so much the school can do when it comes to helping kids cope with it. We already
Sure.
offer mental health programs, we already offer metal detectors, and we've gotten so much pushback as like the county, Broward County in particular. Even if you look on the Broward County Schools Instagram page, when they first started proposing metal detectors, when they first started proposing clear backpacks, you would see almost every comment was in opposition to it. I don't know if you remember
Oh
that.
yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
So I feel like there's only so much the school can do. It really comes down to how we approach guns at a statewide level,
Mm-hmm.
how our governor is going to enact gun restrictions in for the rest of his term and in the next 10 years, how that kind of shapes our perception. Again, yeah, it's I don't really think there's much the schools can do about it.
Yeah, I can see that because yeah, I do believe it's a national issue. It's not
Right.
specific to our county or our state. But outside of that, I think a big cause is, like you said, there is a mental health epidemic in the United
Right.
States where people are being affected, I believe, largely by technology, what they see online. And so I think that's also causing a big issue in students where they have a misconception based on social media and certain things on what the world is truly like, how they should act. And like I said, the whole role and the whole purpose of this podcast is for people to be authentic, for them to not be afraid of what certain people think of them. And I have noticed that social media has shaped a narrative where people act like this copy and paste. They the uniqueness in students is very rare nowadays.
Right. Yeah.
And so how would you say that could be balanced? Because obviously everyone's still going to be watching Instagram reels, they're still going to be on social media, and myself included, it's still interesting. But how do you would you say you can mitigate that and not let that, I guess, influence your personality to a point where you're becoming someone you aren't and you're
Right.
displaying something that you aren't onto different people?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to having self-discipline when it comes to social media, because a lot of people do use social media. Almost like everyone in our class uses some form of social media,
Of
whether it be
course.
YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, etc. It really comes down to how much you're consuming.
Mm-hmm.
Again, moderation is incredibly important. If you're spending 8 to 10 hours a day on Instagram, I think that's a problem. I think eventually what you consume is what you will become. So getting all of that negativity online, having that veil of anonymity to say whatever you want and say it in a matter that's ultimately disrespectful, something that you would never say to someone's face,
Mm-hmm.
but say it online um, under that veil of like your profile picture and your account. I think that's it's definitely problematic,
Mm-hmm.
and our solution to mitigate that would just be, again, there's not much you can do because it's going to stay around for essentially as long as the internet's going to be around.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's really just to have self-discipline and just limit your screen time, go talk to people, have face-to-face conversations like these.
Yeah.
Again, it's really important to um, build empathy is something that I think the internet heavily lacks, and also build like those interpersonal communication skills, because then again, that goes back to the mental health epidemic, that goes back to the lack of being social, the lack of actual face-to-face communication. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Interesting that you bring that up with the, having human interaction and stuff like this. So recently, especially I would say post COVID, at least what I've noticed, AI has become a big thing
Right.
in the school. So some people use it for tools. Me personally, from what I've seen, again, my observations and experiences, I've seen AI in students used for more good than bad. And also, I have a statistics here. This year there was a digital education council global AI student survey conducted with more than 3,800 students from 16 countries, and they found that 55% of these students believe that overuse of AI was teaching devalued education. And here's the really important part: 52% said it negatively affected and impacted their academic performance. I'm assuming maybe they're using it for the wrong reasons. So, in your opinion, how is technology being used in the school system, and what can be done to make it a learning tool? Because I feel that AI has a huge potential to be used for good,
Right.
like really good, especially in the public school system, where I think with AI we can elevate our students and maybe even get it closer to the private education sector. So, what would you say is your opinion on AI in school?
So first and foremost, AI is here to stay. I think that's something that you and I can agree on.
Yeah.
Um, so the best approach that we can use as a school system, as like in general, is to learn to adapt to AI, to
Hmm.
learn to use it for good, because it can either be used for good or it can be used for bad. There's no in between.
Yep.
So, um, again, this actually brings me back to an ancient dialogue called Phaedrus, which was a dialogue between Socrates and Plato. And Socrates argued that writing would weaken memory and critical thinking because people wouldn't internalize knowledge, and that
Hmm.
oral tradition was superior for wisdom because they required active engagement and mental effort. So essentially, Socrates was against writing. He thought that it would make society a lot, it would dumb down society because people would be able to write down, they wouldn't be able to actually process and think. And I want to really point out there's a historical continuity going on here. You have the printing press, radio, television, the internet, and now we have AI. So again, there's been a lot of anxieties over time with how these things would be used, how
Hmm.
technology could positively or negatively advance society. And I'm not like disregarding the threats that come with AI, because there are plenty of threats that come with AI, but I think that with greater technology comes greater threats, but greater solutions aren't impossible. It's more than likely that if we tackle this issue of AI now and we learn to regulate it, if we have, I think government intervention is really important when it comes to regulating AI within the school system. Maybe signing contracts with from the school system to companies that use artificial intelligence to
Hmm.
help integrate it into the learning process, to help kids like use it to uh, accelerate the learning and not cheat. Because again, I can use the internet to cheat, or I can use the internet to help understand something.
Hmm.
And I think artificial intelligence, in a lot of ways, is really no different than how we use the internet. It's
Hmm.
just the process in which artificial intelligence is used, and how effective it is at essentially googling things.
Yeah, I definitely see that because it's honestly, and I can admit this if we're being honest here, AI, it's tempting to use that aspect of
Right.
it because it'll give you a perfectly formulated answer, sometimes even better than what you could or might produce. And so I think that's really also, at least for me, it comes down to how much you want to actually get out of the public education system
Yeah.
and maximizing the knowledge that you get because while yes you can cheat and like even back then people cheated and it's still going to happen and you can cheat, but I think the main issue is, at least for me as well, is okay, let's say you cheat on a calculus test or something and then you get into college and then you're tested on calculus
Yeah.
or
Right.
certain things like this. So I guess there's definitely that aspect where you're devaluing the value of the education you're getting. You're losing like how much you can extract from the school system. And so I think that's a very big thing. But overall, like technology, I think, like I said, it comes down to self discipline for me as well. I noticed that there's that impulse and that trend among students for using AI for the bad, but it can be really maximized for the good. And I do believe that the national government can do a lot, and they should do a lot to step in and to really reframe it and to make it a good thing. And I think that students using it for the bad has also created kind of like this false narrative that AI is going to take people over
Yeah.
and that
Of course.
it's a bad thing. And there are threats,
Mhm.
there really are. But with any technology, there are good sides and bad sides. It's really up to how you use it and how you frame it in terms of education. So now we're gonna move into some. This is gonna be a yeah. This
Yeah.
is now we're gonna move into a bigger question. As you may know, Governor Ron DeSantis signed the Parental Rights and Education Bill into law in 2022, which banned public school discussions of sexual orientation and gender identity for students from kindergarten through third grade. Um, So in high school, I noticed that students are more exposed to LGBTQ clubs.
Yeah.
There's one in school, I'm pretty sure. And so, what do you think about this? Should schools really foster these clubs? Should they keep these clubs? Should they discuss these things, or should that be kept more private?
Well, I believe discussion in a high school environment should be available but not mandatory.
Hmm.
I think that if people want to congregate themselves into groups where they want to discuss certain things, I think they should be able to, just as every other club should be.
Free speech, yeah.
Free speech, right? I think. I mean, while this doesn't exist in a classroom, we're talking about extracurriculars. You
Hmm.
pointed out how our school has a club for LGBTQ members. I think that people should be allowed to congregate after school. I think those rights should be given
Hmm.
back. But again, schools have no rights to infringe on the wishes of a parent. So when it becomes a part of the curriculum, when it becomes a part of what children are learning inside of school mandatorily, I think more restrictions need to be placed on that.
Hmm.
But again, we can't pretend like children aren't being exposed to these matters regarding sexual orientation at a young age.
Hmm.
Most kids, even my experience, learn from other kids first, rather and then adults after. Even going back to when I was in second grade, all of these things that I've learned that we would essentially be taking out of this high school curriculum that we would essentially be removing under Ron DeSantis. I think I've already learned about. It's nothing that's new to me. It just
Hmm.
depends on whether or not the state should be involved in whether
Yeah.
children are learning about these matters.
I think another important thing, especially regarding this, is how early you introduce this into the
Right.
system. Because, like, going back to the desensitization thing, I think, like I said, it's become a normal thing. But I think it's really also important because I don't see a right to be talking to a kindergartner about
No,
this.
yeah.
Because even if you are trying to achieve a certain type of awareness about LGBTQ rights or etc., the kindergartner, his brain, I don't feel is developed and he's not mature enough
Right.
to understand really what you're trying to talk about. So I do believe that in high schools, you've gone to a certain point where you're mature enough, you've already learned about sex, you've already learned about these things to the point where your brain is already acclimatized to it. You can
Exactly.
already understand there's gay and bisexual, etc. And so I do believe that it's important to protect free speech. While I'm not necessarily a advocate for the LGBTQ rights.
Right.
I think it's something that is already within the system, and like you said, it's here to stay, just like
Yeah.
with AI. So I have no hate or disdain for any of these people. It's just their way of thinking. I think
Mhm.
at the end of the day. But yeah, I definitely think in terms of clubs in general, it should be pretty free. People should have the opportunity to join whatever they want, say whatever they
Yeah,
want,
exactly.
and it should be pretty free speech. So yeah, I definitely thought that was interesting to bring up. Um, so kind of as a closing statement here, in your opinion, what are the most pressing challenges facing the American school edu- facing the American public education system today, and what could be a possible solution? We've brought up AI, we've brought up a numerous amount of
Mhm.
things about the public school education system, the disparities between public and private schools. What would you say is the most, like, the biggest issue or the biggest weakness in the system that needs to be addressed?
Okay, so I've been saying this for years. Anyone who I talk to about education, I'm not sure if I've told these before. It's an allocation problem. It's not a budget problem. Our government has billions of dollars that we're investing into public education, and a lot of that money doesn't go to the right places. It goes to bureaucracy rather than direct student needs, like teacher salaries, classroom materials,
Mm,
or especially, this is often overlooked, special education. Now,
yep.
my brother Noah. He's 15 years old now. He has autism. And I remember when my parents were first trying to get him into the public schooling system, public education, they had to go from school to school. They ended up settling. We live about half an hour away from Silver Lakes. They had to send him to Silver Lakes because that was the only school that had a decent special education place. Because the problem is a lot of these teachers, they don't receive training. They don't know how to handle special education children. So oftentimes, even when I was in elementary school, I would see uh, kids just like my brother having outbursts and being taken like by the arms by like police officers, basically to escort them out of the building, even though it's something that they can't control. It's not something in their control, in their power to stop. So even going back to my school, Griffin Elementary, where my mother and my father were trying to send my brother to, their solution was to essentially put him in a padded room where he could harm himself. As long as he wasn't harming others, as if he was harming himself, then that just stops the solution. That mitigates the problem. It doesn't. So, I think much more allocation to special education needs to happen.
Mm,
And I think funds need to be allocated more appropriately. Our officials need to actually listen to the teachers. They need to listen to the parents because they don't know everything. Even though they think they do, they don't. So I
yeah.
think we need to listen to our end users. We need to listen to our constituents and allocate funds according to how the people need the teachers and the parents think they should be allocated.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. Is like, for example, even in our school, I've noticed some kids that I believe could be possibly on the spectrum or could
Right.
have certain, deficiencies or otherwise, and they're in the regular classrooms. And so I do believe that there needs to be a better way to approach this because they are students,
Yeah.
and you are providing them with a service, and I think you have to handle it in a way where they're still given the same learning environment, and they can still excel just almost, if not at the same level as
Exactly.
normal students,
Yeah.
because they are, like I said, students. And so I've also noticed that there's a kind of interesting dynamic between the schools and the parents,
Hmm.
because schools are providing a service at the end of the day. And do feel that schools are becoming, I wouldn't say politicized, but they've almost kind of introducing policies and things that a lot of times are controversial and going against the parents who are paying the students to be there. They're spending their time, and they're supposed to be provided with a service. So, with this dynamic, what would you say? Like, to what extent should the parents' opinions and their input be considered when making rules and policies in the school system?
So I think ultimately the parents' wishes should be respected.
Mm,
That's where I stand politically. That's where I stand in terms of education. Parents should have the final say when it comes to their children's education. But there there becomes a point where there's an objective truth and then there's a truth that you want your kids to know. And I think the more you advance in your education, the closer you get to high school and middle school, the objective truth becomes a lot more relevant, and the truth that your parents want you to know, the progression that they want you to take, becomes a little less relevant.
mm,
And I think that especially in secondary education, especially like during high school, right? There are parts of the curriculum that just teach objective truths. Like if we look at this whole controversy about AP psychology that happened, I think summer 2023, with
ooh,
Ron DeSantis trying to ban the entire class because one chapter talked about gender.
that was a big one, yeah.
I think, respectfully, I think that's stupid. I don't think that's an appropriate course of action to take just because you agree with one thing, especially because AP classes aren't taken by middle schoolers. AP classes aren't taken by elementary students. They're taken by high school students who already know about this. This is something that does exist, right? And it's something that should be, like I said, same thing with guns. It should be regulated. We should have, or artificial intelligence should be regulated, right? We should be able to teach objective truths without having to worry about whether or not people's political beliefs, whether people be offended by objective truths. Objective truths are objective truths, and they're here to stay. So,
Yeah, I definitely agree that like schools should be simply only there to provide their purpose of providing education,
yeah,
and it shouldn't be, I would like, only in the most extreme circumstances, but it generally shouldn't be censored or changed in that way. And if you don't mind me asking, what specifically was that chapter about that it had to
I
be
don't know
taken out?
specifically, but I'm pretty sure it was regarding sexual orientation. It was
Mm,
regarding, I think, teaching gender identity and different, like how different I don't know what's the word for it. Not philosophers. How different theorists on the subject kind of like approached it and
okay.
how it was developed throughout science. So it's not really pushing any type of agenda. It's mainly just teaching. Okay, so we've identified like not a problem, but like we've identified a trend of people becoming increasingly more LGBTQ,
Yeah.
people kind of leaning in that direction. So we want to know, we want to understand it. We want to know why is this happening?
Yeah,
Why
yeah.
is this becoming more socially acceptable?
I
So
think that was, I mean, yeah, I agree with you on that. I don't really see a specific agenda,
yeah,
especially if it's AP psychology, which is a scientific class. And this
exactly.
is
Yeah,
a objective trend that we're noticing, and they were simply looking at it from a scientific lens. I don't see how that could be an issue, but I understand. I guess DeSantis is, as we've seen with the parental rights and education bill, he's very, very strong in that position.
right.
Um, so yeah, I definitely do think that parents, their opinions should be respected because at the end of the day, they're choosing to send their children there, and it's something that I've noticed a lot is there's a disconnect between what the parents want and what the schools do.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think it's really important for there to be a cooperation between the two institutions because at the end of the day, you know, without the parents sending the kids, there's no school.
Right.
So they're both just as dependent on each other, and that's also why there should be a respect among both groups. Um, so yeah, I definitely think that was important. But going back to the curriculum, one thing I've noticed, um, and I can kind of vouch for this. I have this very similar opinion. But one thing I've noticed is there's been like a almost like a movement, if I would call it, where students have been speaking out about how the curriculum isn't necessarily as practical as they might like. It's not teaching them things on how to save. We've had personal financial literacy, but even I would argue is a bit structured and academic. So there's been a movement in people arguing that the school system doesn't really teach them things that they're going to need later on in life.
Mhm.
Um, and I've also noticed that a lot of the people that argue this don't really participate in the school system.
Exactly.
It gives them an excuse to exit and fully not even take maybe what they can and reap what and take the best and maximize their knowledge. So what would you say? How do you feel on this issue?
Well, I feel like this narrative has been around for a while. It's been around as long as I can remember about like kids being like, "Oh, well, we're not really. How is this preparing us for real life? How is mathematics? How is taking mandatory science classes preparing me for a job in finance?" I think it's important to be well-rounded. More than anything, it's not just to be have tunnel vision on one particular subject because it's important to be an informed citizen. It's important to be able to think critically. It's important to know the basic things you would need to know to live independently, right? So a lot of people complain, especially in our school, about how like um, we're not exactly taught, we're not specialized in like things that teach us personal finance, things that teach us like budgeting. But we have learned that, and the school has done a great job of actually preparing us for that by making personal finance mandatory, by taking economics classes mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, something that's really interesting to me is that people will demand all this stuff, but when it finally comes around, when we're finally forced to take personal finance or forced to take economics, they start complaining, and I find that a little ironic. So
Yeah,
I think a lot
definitely.
of times people will just complain for the sake of complaining, for the sake of having something to talk about, for the sake of blaming their problems on something else,
Or not just not doing the work.
or not doing the work. Exactly.
Yeah,
So I think
yeah.
that's my thoughts on it.
Hmm. And so, do you think, because right now, we have personal financial literacy, we have physical education classes and things like this. Do you think that there needs to be more courses integrated into the school curriculum to make more of a practical curriculum, or do you think it should stay how it is?
I think it should stay how it is. Like
Mm-hmm.
with the core classes, like you have math, English, social studies, science. I think those are essential, right? And if anything, we have electives, right? We have options for kids who want to specialize with their career path. Like I've taken speech classes, I've taken debate classes, I've taken economics classes that I didn't have to take, but I took them anyways because I know it would help prepare me for a future career, right? Um, People, it really comes down to your individual motivations, your individual ambitions, and really how bad you want it, right? Because our school at least, I can't speak for all public schools. Our school offers a wide variety of courses to help get you into any subject. We offer dual enrollment courses to help even classes that aren't offered in school, you can still take them outside of school. So I think our school is doing a pretty good job of preparing students.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think courses that don't have to be mandatory should be mandatory. If people complain about it, then they can take electives or they can take dual enrollment classes or
Yeah,
FLVS.
that's another thing I noticed is these people complain about how there's not certain courses that are in there. I've heard people say there should be driver's education courses, maybe some sort of manual labor courses or something. Maybe doing something with the hands. I've heard that a lot, like handmade things and etc. But what people don't realize is you have the prerogative to go outside the school system
Exactly.
and seek those things. You can go online, you can still learn about stocks. It's not necessarily, and I think that's the hypocrisy of it. Is a lot of those people that complain about the school system aren't don't like the school system and aren't ones to contribute to the school
Yeah.
system. So they point out the problem and they expect the school to solve the problem, but they can solve the problem on their own. They have the
Mhm.
resources, and I've noticed that in general with our generation is they complain a lot and they have the resources to fix their problems.
Yeah.
So they complain, let's say, about not being fit or not, not having the right education school system or a number of things, and they
Mhm.
have all the resources. And that's another thing I want to emphasize is that especially here, you guys as American citizens, and I can say this because I know a lot of people in other areas, you are so fortunate. You have so many things. Even if you have, and I'm going to quote Dana White, if you have this much savage in you, everything out there is for the taking. You could go and be a billionaire, a millionaire, especially in this generation. You have so many opportunities. And so I think it's really important for people to realize their true potential and not be afraid to realize and go after that potential and embrace it.
Right.
That's another thing I feel like is very important for people to balance is while school teaches you one thing, it's really important for you to have a certain thinking and a certain approach to life that is kind of outside of that. You should have critical thinking skills. You should be able to think outside of the box, creativity. I've noticed a lot of, like, for example, our friend Nick. We're not gonna
Hmm.
say the full name because whatever. Um, but he is an example, I think, of someone who's become a bit too stuck into the system. He's become very rigid and very, and while I do believe organization and things like that is important, it's also important to have kind of this human interaction, sense of humor and things that, you shouldn't be completely into the system to the point where you lose your critical thinking and certain things that I think can make you unique and give you a lot of success later on.
Right.
So, I mean, I definitely think it's very important for people to balance how they approach the school system and not get too tied up in it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the things also about the school system that they teach you isn't directly in the curriculum. Discipline, learning, having connections, they already teach you that with the clubs and
Yeah.
things like that.
Exactly.
I think that's a big thing. Networking and all that, that's
Of course.
crucial. Crucial.
Especially if you're going into a career with like finance, law, anything in that sphere, politics especially. If you're trying to become an entrepreneur, having those connections, being a socially competent individual, and taking the initiative to do things that you don't have to do, going the extra mile with clubs, extracurriculars, even sports, building that self-discipline, networking, all that stuff, incredibly important, incredibly
Yeah,
valuable to future development.
I think so as well. And so another thing I found interesting, big another controversy here.
Right.
We love talking about controversies. Um, is there was I forget if it was a court case or what exactly propelled the decision, but we had the affirmative action within
Yeah.
college admissions, and then that became later overturned. So while I do understand where they're coming from and what they're trying to achieve, with letting more disadvantaged students have an edge in different college admissions. What do you feel about this? Should it be purely academic, or should there be a social aspect where they're trying to propel disadvantaged students to have more opportunities? How should the school system approach this?
So first and foremost, it's very important. Again, I believe in a concept of Rawlsian justice, which is essentially, if you look into John Rawls, he believes that the least well-off in society should be benefited. That should be our goal, to benefit the least well-off in society. But where affirmative action goes wrong is how it plays into this race card. If you can't solve racism with racism, even historical inequities that result from segregation, that result from slavery, etc., you can't solve that by prioritizing people who have people of a certain skin color and through the system of affirmative action. It should all be about merit, or if anything, our social safety net should be about class, because class is, in my opinion, a much bigger problem. It's a much bigger issue,
Yeah.
and that's really what we need to solve. Because, um, yeah, I think class should really be like, we should really hone in on that and focus on lifting those people up, and not just
Mm.
based on race, but by on merit as well.
And I would almost argue, you brought the concept of racism up.
Hmm.
I would almost argue that by perpetuating this narrative that black or other minority families are the ones who are disadvantaged, and while
Yeah.
that is true,
Hmm.
by keeping that narrative and keep pushing that reality, I would almost argue that is racism in a certain way because you're
Yeah.
pushing this narrative that they're disadvantaged and they can't make it to that top
Hmm.
level, which is why I would say, because I come, like my mother, for example, I come from lower middle class families. Um, it's really important for people to realize that your class isn't the definition of where you can get. You can still push just as hard and still get just as high, which is why I do believe that while people should focus on the class, and there should be definitely more scholarships and things like that given, I think when it comes strictly to admissions, it should be primarily academic.
Yeah.
And academic, and also like looking at the individual instead of the individual's position in society.
Right.
So, like for example, let's say there's a student with 1500 SAT. He's an outstanding student, someone like yourself, versus I don't know someone who uh, is in a poor neighborhood and they have maybe a 3.0 GPA and things like that. And I've heard arguments saying that they don't have access to the same resources and things like that. But like I said, I do believe that if you really want to succeed, you can.
Yeah.
It's really about your own your own self and how far you're willing to go to
Yeah.
succeed. And that's also why I think it should be merit based. But
Mhm.
I do think there should be a large plethora of scholarships and other economic opportunities awarded. Um, but yeah, overall, this also ties into the fact that there's been a kind of this uh, balance kind of been tilting right and left between the political or between the school system kind of having more politically minded policies and things versus non-political. So I guess we've kind of slightly discussed this, but I just want to clarify. Do you think that schools should be have these kind of policies, or should it be strictly non-political and strictly academic?
I think schools should be as far away from politics as possible. I don't think any school board, I don't think any members of the school board should be employed based on policy alone or political stance.
Mhm.
I think that's incredibly cancerous to fostering an environment where children are supposed to question authority, where children are supposed to think critically, where people are supposed to have that outlet to kind of like think about solutions and then interpret that in any way that they want. Again, this whole podcast, everything, we're not breeding people to be Republicans or Democrats. We're breeding them to be free thinkers.
Exactly.
We want them to actually not be pushed into one direction, but have a variety of experiences, have a variety of inputs when it comes to forming a political opinion.
Hmm.
I've been on the left. I've been on the right. I'm currently a registered independent. Um, I find that more often than not, the answer lies in the middle. It lies with taking some values from some sides,
Yeah.
taking some values from the other side, and you can't rely on partisan politics alone to essentially foster a generation of people who you want to think critically and not think biased.
And overall, partisan politics, I feel like, um, created this toxic environment
Of course, yeah.
within Americans where they become so divided.
Mm.
And if you look back at the core, like going back, even back to George Washington's times in his farewell address, he specifically said, "Do not form political parties."
Yep.
And so I do believe, while you can't have everyone under the same branch, there should be a a much bigger focus on the cooperation
Yeah.
among two
Of
parties, where they
course.
should really be trying to come together. And I think, um, like you, in many cases, I could be independent, where I might like this Democratic policy or this Republican policy, and it's really all about um, having your opinion and speaking freely, but at the same time not persecuting other people for their opinions.
Yeah.
I see that all day on comments. Oh, this guy's so stupid. This guy's a felon. He's a criminal. She's stupid. She's liberal. All the time.
Yeah.
Like, it's a growing trend where I think Americans need to step back and realize that just like they have their free speech and they're allowed to say what they want, and just as much as they value that, they should afford that same respect to other people's free speech and give them the opportunity to say their opinion without that person fearing of being ostracized or etc. And I've noticed that even sometimes within school, for example, if you have a specific opinion, nowadays, if you're on the right, you're considered a radical or
Yeah.
something crazy. If you're on the left, you're considered woke and out of your mind. It should be, it shouldn't be like that. It should be
Yeah.
everyone has their own opinion and it should be respected. And overall, friendship shouldn't be determined by how you think about certain political
No,
things.
exactly. And I think for me, I have friends on both sides, both political parties, and I think it's important because you're not overlooking anyone's concerns,
Yeah.
right? Because it's so easy to get tunnel vision when it comes to like only surrounding yourself with right wing friends, only surrounding yourself with left wing friends. You often overlook how these two sides, they really both target individuals who are in need of help. These are constituents who need help, who have problems, who identify with certain political parties because they think they can solve their problems better than others. So as long as you're looking out for everyone, as long as you're understanding, having empathy when it comes to politics, I think you're clear. You have a green light to actually um, delve deeper into that political sphere, to associate with a political party, as long as you're looking out for those people who are in need, right, and not dehumanizing the other side, and not ostracizing anyone who actually does need help. I think that's really
Yeah,
important
and
too.
I do believe that
Yeah.
by surrounding yourself, by having a selective group and
Mhm.
surrounding yourself only with, let's say, Republicans or Democrats, you're almost doing yourself a disservice
Yeah.
where you're putting yourself in this echo chamber where people always agree with you and things. And I think that's also another reason why when you go outside of that and you hear from someone of a different political opinion, I think that's also what might cause your like hate for them because you
Mm.
see it, and this is almost like a primal thing.
Yeah.
You see it as something's different, it's bad immediately. And so I think uh, people can, especially in an educated education environment, they can. It's almost better to have people from multiple backgrounds and multiple opinions because that's how you can really grow. I think that's how you can think freely, maybe learn from certain people. I mean, I can speak for myself. I have many friends that I disagree with like so much
Yep.
on certain
I can name a
issues.
few.
I like
Yeah.
so much, and even we disagree on some things, but I still value our friendship because the whole purpose is for us to speak freely and for us to learn from each other at the
Right.
end of the day. So it's not really about proving your opinion, and it shouldn't be. It should
Mhm.
simply be exercising your free speech and learning from each other. And especially in an education environment with students, people should have a more considerative and they should be more open-minded to different things and not immediately place labels on it
Exactly.
and
I
look at
totally
it
agree.
on how it's viewed by society. It should
Yeah.
always be, I think, respected. And I've also noticed schools, I think, should also be involved in this, fostering a more academic approach and a more learning from each other approach when it comes to sharing opinions, because I've noticed that there's been a growth in censorship,
Hmm.
not just locally, but nationally, in some cases locally as well.
Yeah.
Um, and so I guess because there's also been the people saying that certain speech might be harmful or things like this. So should what extent do you think should we have free speech in the school system? Because in some cases people say that it it clashes with the right and the wrong free speech and etc. So how should free speech play out in the education system?
I think we need to clarify really what free speech is. Essentially, it's about, it really goes back to those First Amendment rights about freedom of expression, freedom of stating your mind, questioning authority, right? Things I 100% agree with. And then we get where conflict comes is when people start getting offended by free speech. I think getting offended is incredibly important. People need to be offended. People need to be offended to
Yeah,
have their minds change.
of
There is no
course.
change in society without at least some people getting offended.
Yeah, of
So I think that's incredibly important. But we also need to learn how to be offended, but also like be able to respect the person, right?
course.
Or and even if you're offending someone else, be respectful to them,
Yeah, of
right?
course, of
Never
course.
dehumanize anyone. Never see them as less than like equal to you because they disagree with you.
Mhm.
Just understand that you guys have different opinions, right? And those opinions, they shouldn't really define who the other person is. First and foremost, don't like disassociate the person from their politics.
Yeah,
And it's never reason to like just stop talking to somebody,
yeah,
because again, when you stop getting offended, when you start surrounding yourself in the echo chamber of just yes men agreeing with your politics, you're
exactly.
never going to change, you're never going to evolve as a person.
It's harmful, I
Yeah.
would argue. It's
Hmm.
really harmful to your development, mental development as well,
Exactly. Yeah.
because the brain needs to be exposed to different ideas and different thoughts.
Hmm.
Uh you can't achieve growth when you're given the static feedback of the same ideas all the time.
Yeah.
And I would argue that life is really all about growth
Of
and
course.
changing
Yeah.
your ideas. I mean, we've seen this in so many politicians where they're now right wing and then they used to be left wing or vice versa. And so I definitely think it should be, like you said, free speech, and people shouldn't it shouldn't be restricted to preserve someone's feelings
Of
in that way,
course. Yeah.
because people need to be they need to have tough skin. You can't expect people to cater to your whims and call you certain names and this and
Mm.
that. It has to be you have to build tough skin in this
Yeah.
world, and especially I've noticed that people censor other people for their the preservation of their emotions and their emotional state.
Yeah.
um I would argue that that actually makes you weaker, if anything. So
Hmm.
people portray it as they're preserving their emotions, and that's making them stronger and healthier mentally, but I think it's making you weaker. You have to be
100%.
exposed to different opinions, and obviously still be respectful to the person. I'm not saying go call them names and insult the life out of them.
Yeah,
Always be respectful, but people need they need to be exposed to different ideas. I feel like otherwise,
100%.
like
Yeah,
you said, you're in that echo chamber of everyone telling you the same thing, and then you're never gonna grow. You're gonna stay the same. It's always gonna be static. And that's also why I think it's important for people to have diverse friend groups, people from different backgrounds, because you can learn from so many different things.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that's about all the questions.
Mm.
If you have anything else you'd like to get off your chest,
No, I think I pretty much covered everything.
okay. Well,
Thank you for inviting me here.
of course, that's the first podcast
Yeah.
episode, guys. I hope you tune in. Like I said, I would try and have episodes out. I would say bare minimum once a month. Um, but I would right now I'm aiming for every 2 weeks. That would be the preference. And so yeah, this is just something we're getting started on. I hope you guys like it. Give us any feedback you have in the comments. Anything that you think we can change. Anything that you think would make it better. Just anything in general. So that's about it. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Thank you.